The silence in my office was so heavy I could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind me, a steady, rhythmic thumping that felt like a countdown. My accountant, Arthur, a man I'd known for 30 years, didn't look up from his tablet. He just cleared his throat, a dry, raspy sound, and said, "David, your mortgage on the Oak Creek property, it's been settled in full." I laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. I told him he was mistaken, that I hadn't made a lump sum payment. I couldn't have, considering I'd just poured the last of my liquid capital into my son Julian's third disruptive tech startup. Arthur finally looked at me, his eyes sympathetic behind his spectacles. He said, "You didn't pay it, David. Your daughter, Claire, did. She bought the note from the bank 3 days ago. She's technically your landlord now." My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it stopped entirely. But the shock wasn't just about the money. It was the sudden, freezing realization of how badly I had miscalculated the last 10 years of my life. To understand why my daughter, the girl I'd spent a decade treating like an afterthought, had just bought my house out from under my son's nose, I have to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I thought I was building a legacy, but was actually just funding a disaster. I spent 40 years building Miller's Precision Machining. I started with one lathe in a rented garage and turned it into a 20-employee shop that manufactured specialized components for the aerospace industry. I worked 80-hour weeks, my hands permanently stained with industrial coolant and grease. I provided a life for my family that I never had. We had the 4-bedroom colonial in Oak Creek, the summer cabin, and I made sure both my kids graduated debt-free. Julian was my golden son. He was charismatic, fast-talking, and had this energy that my wife Martha always called the spark of a visionary. He didn't want to get his hands dirty in the shop. He wanted to change the world. Claire, on the other hand, was quiet. She was the one who stayed home to help me weed the garden or organize my receipts on Sunday afternoons. She went to school for accounting and took a boring job at a mid-sized firm. I loved her, of course, but I'll be honest, I didn't think she needed much from me. She was stable. Julian, though, Julian was always one big break away from greatness. That should have been my wake-up call. That bias. But I kept telling myself that Julian just needed a little more runway to take off. I didn't realize I was building him a runway made of my own retirement. The first time Julian came to me for money, he was 24. He had an idea for a social media for pets app. He called it Paws Connect. He needed $50,000 for development. I looked at his polished PowerPoint presentation and felt a surge of pride. This was my boy, thinking big. I wrote the check. 2 years later, Paws Connect was a memory, and $50,000 had evaporated into marketing costs and consultancy fees. Julian didn't apologize. He just told me he'd learned valuable lessons and was on to something even bigger, a line of organic energy bars tailored to the sleep cycles of night shift workers. He needed $75,000 this time. Martha chimed in at dinner singing, "David, he's got your entrepreneurial spirit. Don't stifle him now." So I wrote another check. Meanwhile, Claire asked me for a $3,000 loan to take a specialized certification course in forensic accounting. I remember looking at my bank balance, thinking about Julian's production costs, and telling her, "Money's a little tight right now, honey. Maybe the firm can pay for it?" She just nodded, her face unreadable, and said, "You're right, Dad. I'll figure it out." She never asked me for a dime again. If that was all, I probably would have let it go. But then came the crypto mining farm.
By this time, I was 66 and thinking about retirement. The shop was still profitable, but the physical toll of 40 years on the floor was catching up to my knees and back. Julian came to me with a plan that he promised would triple my retirement in 18 months. He needed $125,000 to buy a fleet of high-powered servers. He'd set them up in my own garage to save on rent. "Dad," he said, leaning across my kitchen table with that same infectious grin, "this is the future. Why slave away over a lathe when the machines can print money for us?" Against my better judgment, I gave in. I dipped into equity of the house. I let him fill my garage with humming, heat-spitting machines that tripled my electric bill. 6 months later, the crypto market crashed. Julian didn't even have the decency to help me haul the useless hardware to the scrapyard. He just disappeared on a soul-searching trip to Bali for a month, funded, I later found out, by a credit card he'd convinced Martha to co-sign. And that's when I realized They didn't see me as their father. They saw me as a bank account with a pulse. The disrespect started to pile up like sawdust on a shop floor. At Thanksgiving, Julian sat at the head of my table, a seat he just took without asking, and started talking about liquidating the Oak Creek property. "Dad, let's be real," Julian said, swirling a glass of expensive scotch I'd bought. "This house is too big for you and Mom. If we sell now, we can put that capital into my new meta real estate venture. We'll get you a nice condo, and I'll have the seed money to actually hit the big leagues." I looked at Martha. She was nodding. "He's right, David. It's a lot of cleaning for me, and Julian needs this win." I looked at Claire. She was sitting at the far end of the table, picking at her turkey. She hadn't said a word. She'd been working late every night for 2 years, often coming over on weekends just to check on me. But she was never invited into these family business discussions. "I'm not selling the house, Julian," I said quietly. Julian rolled his eyes, a gesture so dismissive it made my blood run cold. "Don't be stubborn, Dad. You're thinking like a machinist. You need to think like a CEO. The house is just an asset, and right now it's a wasted one." Something in me shifted that day. I didn't say a word, I didn't argue. But the next morning, I didn't go to the shop. I went to see Arthur, my accountant. I asked him to do a deep dive into my finances, the shop's books, and specifically where that $250,000 had actually gone. What he found was worse than I imagined. Julian hadn't just failed at startups. He'd been funneling money into a lifestyle he couldn't afford: luxury rentals, high-end dinners, and networking trips. And the mortgage? Because I'd been so distracted by Julian's demands, I'd missed the fine print on the HELOC I'd signed. The interest rates had ballooned, and the bank was preparing to call the loan. I was on the verge of losing everything I'd built. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I didn't tell Martha, and I certainly didn't tell Julian. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. I started making calls, not to investors, but to a different kind of professional. I also started talking to Claire, not about money, but about her work. I found out she wasn't just a bookkeeper. She had started her own firm specializing in corporate restructuring and debt acquisition. She was, as Arthur put it, a shark in a cardigan. One Tuesday afternoon, I called a family meeting at the Oak Creek house. I told them it was about the future of the estate. Julian arrived late, looking energized. He probably thought I was finally handing him the deed to the house so he could sell it for his next fantasy. Martha had put out a spread of appetizers, acting like we were celebrating a lottery win.
"All right, Dad," Julian said, leaning back on the sofa. "Let's get the paperwork out of the way. I've already got a realtor lined up for the house. We can probably close in 30 days. I sat in my armchair, the one Julian usually tried to sit in, and took a slow sip of coffee. "There's been a change of plans, Julian." "What do you mean?" he asked, his smirk faltering just a fraction. "I mean that I've looked at the $250,000 I've invested in you over the last 5 years. I've looked at the receipts Arthur found. The trips to Vegas, the designer clothes, the consulting fees paid to your girlfriend." Julian's face went pale. "Dad, those were business expenses." "Quiet," I said. It wasn't a yell. It was the voice I used on the shop floor when a machine was about to blow a seal. He went silent. "I've also realized that I've been a poor father. Not to you, Julian. I've given you everything. I've been a poor father to Claire. I ignored her hard work because it didn't come with a fancy pitch deck. I denied her a $3,000 loan while I threw 6 figures into your trash fire." Martha stood up. "David, that's not fair. Julian is just trying to—" "Julian is a leech, Martha," I said, looking at her. "And he's a leech you encouraged. But here's the news. The bank was going to foreclose on this house because of the debt Julian convinced me to take on, but they didn't, because the mortgage was bought out." Julian let out a breath of relief. "Oh, thank God. So you found another investor? Who is it? We can work out a buyback." "I'm the investor, Julian." Everyone turned to Claire. She was standing by the fireplace, holding a manila folder. She looked at her brother with a cold, professional clarity that I finally recognized. It was the same look I had when I was measuring a part to the 1,000th of an inch. "I bought the debt, Julian," Claire said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the hurt I'd put there for years. "I've spent the last 6 months quietly acquiring the distressed assets of Miller's Precision Machining and the personal debt attached to this property. I own the house, I own the shop's equipment, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, I've officially filed for the eviction of Julian Miller Innovations from the garage and the shop's office space." The room went so quiet I could hear the wind rattling the window panes. Julian's jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to hang limp.
You can't do that. You're my sister. We're family. Family is a two-way street, Claire replied. She walked over and handed him a single sheet of paper. That's an itemized list of every dollar you took from Dad under false pretenses. I've spent my career finding hidden money, Julian. You're not very good at hiding it. You have 48 hours to clear your junk out of the garage. If you're not out, the sheriff will be here on Thursday. Martha started to cry, a high, thin, wailing sound. David, tell her she can't do this. This is our home. It's Claire's home, I said, standing up. I've signed a lease agreement with her. I'll be paying her rent from the small salary she's giving me to stay on as a consultant at the shop. The rest of the shop's profits, they're going toward rebuilding my retirement fund, under Claire's management. Julian stood up, his face turning a mottled purple. You're throwing me out after everything? I'm your son. I'm the one who was going to make the Miller name famous. The Miller name is already famous in the aerospace industry for quality and honesty, I said, stepping closer to him. You're the only one who didn't know that. You thought the name was a blank check. The bank is closed, Julian. Get out.
He tried to argue, tried to guilt-trip me, tried to turn to Martha for help, but she just sat there, looking at the floor. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the spark she'd been protecting was just a flickering match in a windstorm. Julian left that night, cursing and kicking the door on his way out. That was 6 months ago. Julian is currently living in a studio apartment and working as a junior sales rep for a car dealership. I hear he's struggling with the boring reality of a 40-hour work week. Martha has become very quiet, very attentive. She realizes now that her lifestyle depends entirely on the daughter she used to ignore. As for me, I've never been more at peace. My knees still ache, but I don't go into the shop every day anymore. I go in twice a week to mentor the new floor manager Claire hired. The rest of the time, I'm in the garden or having lunch with my daughter. Last Sunday, Claire came over with some papers for me to sign. We sat on the porch watching the sun set over the trees. I looked at her, this brilliant, capable woman I'd almost lost to my own blindness, and I said, I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, Claire. She just smiled, a small, knowing expression, and patted my hand. It's okay, Dad. I've always been here. I was just waiting for you to finish your investment in the wrong Miller. My son calls every Sunday now, usually asking for a small bridge loan to get him through the month. I always give him the same answer. Talk to my landlord, Julian. She handles all my finances now. Funny how that works. He hasn't called her once. He knows better than to try and pitch a shark.